Welcome to The Media Plan, a mini podcast series by Market and Hustle that aims to be a collection of unfiltered ideas from marketing, media, and mad tech creators and thinkers. On today's episode, we're joined by Keith Delaney, co-founder and CEO of Primer. Keith has been at the forefront of B2B marketing, leading Primer in putting audiences back at the center of B2B marketing. Prior to Primer, Keith played key roles as an expert network advisor at First Round Capital and an advisor at Stack Sports and Bungalow, and head of growth at Eden Inc., where he managed to scale revenues 14x in just 24 months. I'm excited to have Keith with me today as we'll discuss audience targeting in B2B ads, why measurement in B2B is broken, and how marketers can navigate these challenges to drive better outcomes for their businesses.
In your opinion, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that B2B marketers and media buyers in general are facing today?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. I mean, I think it's a really crazy time in marketing in general, B2C, but it's particularly challenging in B2B, given what's happening in privacy. You're seeing a lot of new changes coming from browsers to Apple iOS updates that make digital advertising a lot harder to effectively measure. And you're seeing sort of as a result, like the performance of a lot of channels sort of degrade, or the appearance of performance of a lot of channels degrade. So basically digital measurement and targeting is getting more challenging. And I don't think a lot of marketers actually recognize that. They keep looking at like touch-based attribution and they're like, looking at the UTMs and they're trying to like trace the path to conversion. And they don't realize how much if that pie was like, this big in 2016, it's now this big, right? And it's sort of like they're looking out into the distance, but there's like a fog line 500 feet in front of them. So they're making decisions based on like pretty incomplete data. And that's huge, right? So that affects all of like their paid programs. Second big thing that's, I think everybody's thinking about is like AI content, how that affects SEO, right? That's a big thing. Google's constantly, keeps recalibrating the algorithm based on that. It's like, do people really like go to Google search to figure stuff out now? Or are they going more and more to places like Reddit, communities, forums? So you're seeing a lot of community hacking, I think. And then the other thing is probably like really big. It might be the biggest thing. It's just how and where people consume content. It's more and more, right? It's on your phone. It's more and more, it's video versus text. There's these sort of shifting sands. YouTube Shorts is huge now. That wasn't the case a couple of years ago. So there's always that kind of like chasing the next platform, chasing the next channel, the new medium. Those things, it's that beautiful and brutal thing about being in marketing is it's always evolving. Yeah.
It's always changing. No, that's so true. This is one industry where you cannot get complacent. Complacency is opportunity, but it can also disrupt people and businesses that have built around an existing set of user behaviors in the market. So I think that's very true. To your point about tracking, I was actually just dealing with this issue. Been working with a new tech brand, and we just launched their campaigns about 2 to 3 weeks ago. Seeing a ton of data and conversions on the platform, got really excited. And their team tells me, they're seeing the leads come in and they're getting the calls, but their CRM is just not picking up any of the UTM data from the website. And I'm just like, oh, that hurts so much. We know it's working. Now we have to figure out why, but it's difficult to answer the why if the tracking isn't correctly set up.
And the worst part about that is executives, right? Like CFOs, CEOs, they have these expectations that have been set on the last, 10 years of doing business, that they can measure all of this, right? And really, and they should be basing their investments on, return on ad spend. That's very measurable, but it's not the techniques for measurement need to evolve. And I think not a lot of leadership has caught up and is like really aware of that. And it's kind of on marketers to educate them. Yeah. But it's going to be an uphill battle.
And specifically about that, what do you think, like, where do you see the gaps within measurement now? Like what does like a best in class business, and obviously it depends on the vertical that they're in and how complex the organization is, but like table stakes, what would be some things that when you think about measurement for B2B, you would say are pretty important to have in your playbook?
Yeah, well, I think in B2B, what's interesting is, we kind of always learn our lessons from B2C. There's B2B is more complex, but in a weird way, B2C marketers tend to be more sophisticated. And so the techniques that they're turning towards are ones that have been around for a long time, but I think they're only just making their way into B2B marketing. It's things like media mix modeling. Obviously you have to have a certain amount of spend to do that. But even like basic things, like if you go back to how Zoom grew, they did no digital advertising, none. It was a really bold strategy at the time. They did all out of home, all like radio and billboards and things like that. And then they just measured the impact by doing geographic comparisons, right? They'd have a control market, Louisville, right? And a test market, Lexington, and that are very similar. Run ads in one, they like look at the traffic coming to their website, downloads, looking at it by IP address and geo, and then measuring the impact right that way. Those kind of lifts and incrementality testing is basically what you kind of have to do more and more of to understand, hey, okay, we can measure this much, right? We can see the UTM parameters. We know that it's working to this extent, but what happens like for the part that we can't directly measure, right? How do we judge if this investment is worth it? It's basically going to be like, you basically have to measure the lift. Facebook has a conversion lift API. There's tools out there that are kind of built towards this, but really like the biggest gap is just the mentality of that and how to make the case for that. I think a lot of CEOs, if you take that to them and say, hey, this had a lift, they're like, well, that's not like, what about all these other things you could control for? It's just, that's where it becomes difficult, but it's definitely the direction things are moving.
Yeah, I often say that we've become very sophisticated in our acquisition strategies, and oftentimes our measurement infrastructure doesn't match and can't capture the impact of that. So I think it's a very big challenge. And to your point, not every business might have enough data to run like an MMM. Geolift testing is something that is also very commonly used, but we don't have like a one like gold standard outside of just click-based UTM tracking, which is so ancient. There isn't anything more sophisticated that has like become industry standard. And it is a challenge because if you're making investment decisions based on what you can measure and your ability to measure isn't the greatest, then you'll often won't make the best decisions.
Well, I have one more point to make on that topic. I have been going like deep into attribution land lately because it's something that's near and dear to my heart. And what ends up happening in B2B is LinkedIn, I think, has 43% desktop traffic. Google search 39%. People will it's much easier to resolve identities if your path to conversion is on the same device, right? But as soon as somebody starts seeing an ad, right, on their phone, there's no way like any of these touch-based tools can resolve the conversion that happens on the desktop with that view of the ad on the phone. So it's leading to this bias towards things that like we can measure really well, but that doesn't necessarily mean the thing that actually has the highest ROI.
Would love to hear your thoughts in terms of the gaps that we're dealing with within audience targeting. We've talked a little bit about some of the challenges today and the gaps, the evident gaps with measurement, but the other piece obviously is audience targeting. This is super important. In B2C, the idea of targeting is starting to shift because algorithms are becoming more mature and the need to be prescriptive with audience targeting isn't as important. Would be curious to know what's the status from a B2B lens and what are some of the challenges there?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. So when you think about B2C, how B2C targeting algorithms work, right? There's really like, and I'll just speak to the two biggest B2C advertising platforms, Google and Facebook. So Google and Facebook basically collect data from two sources. Their own first-party data about how users are interacting on their platform, the actions they're taking, what they know about those users based on who they follow, interests, yada yada yada. And then they also have a third-party tracking, which is all of the websites, right, that have installed the Facebook Pixel or the Facebook SDK in a mobile app, with all the same thing that's so that second sort of layer of data has obviously decreased in effectiveness enormously, that third-party data, because of the same things that are making attribution harder, right? Cookie blockers. Safari doesn't even automatically blocks third-party cookies. Apple's Ask App Not to Track. 95% of people opt out of tracking. So Facebook's algorithm it's still actually pretty amazing that how well it performs just using really its own data and not really having as good access to third-party data. So what does that mean for B2B though, right? What it means for B2B is that Facebook used to kind of work pretty well with that third-party data. You could make it work, like website retargeting data. The pixel is on your page, somebody visits your website, you can retarget them with ads. But now maybe that Facebook pixel on your page is getting blocked. So you're not able to retarget that person with ads on Instagram. So that means the ROAS of Facebook is looking worse and worse for B2B using sort of Facebook's traditional built-in targeting. The alternative, right? So it's like sort of cookie-based targeting is it's never going to be what it used to be. And in fact, it's just going to get worse. The alternative is to try to find some other ways to identify your audience on these channels. One thing that's been big for a while in the world of ABM is IP-based targeting, right? The IP address of a company, you see people, you serve ads on New York Times to anybody who has that matching IP address. It kind of works. More and more, right? IP addresses are being used for connected TV targeting. So a lot of people are leaning in more and more to the IP address-based technology that's been around for a while. And then the third alternative is to actually use like more to go actually to some of the notes that financial institutions do, some of the techniques they do. So when you apply for a loan, like all of a sudden when you enter in your some of your information, your address, your name, your social, what these financial institutions are doing is they are basically pulling a ton of different third-party data together to paint a picture of who you are and your credit worthiness. They're doing like a form of identity resolution, but they're doing it based on all this like kind of more permanent or semi-permanent information about you that's not really a cookie, right? It's like your personal email and all the places you've shared your personal email and your mobile phone number and all the interactions. And these people like opt in to share that data. You can actually access and tap into some of that similar data and build and use it to resolve kind of that B2B to B2C divide. So we can say, Keith at sayprimer.com is actually, Keith Delaney at gmail.com. Facebook, LinkedIn knows me as Keith at Say Primer. Facebook knows me as Keith Delaney at Gmail. With both those emails, I can upload you to Facebook, and all of a sudden I can match you, and I can unlock Facebook targeting the same way I can unlock matched audiences on LinkedIn. This principle of kind of using permanent identifiers, whether it's mobile phone numbers, emails, there's a slew of them, and there's a bunch of data science we've done around, kind of what drives different match rates on different ad platforms. That's something that's not going away, and that's kind of what we're leaning into at like these custom audiences as the alternative now that sort of cookies are degrading.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. Using these identifiers that are persistent, and the platforms are unlikely to remove those capabilities around matching. That said, these platforms are pretty, innovative and creative, building out different types of solutions over the years, particularly with targeting. So I'm curious if there is sort of like I'm curious why these platforms haven't invested in building out these like B2B audience affinity segments like more prescriptively. Like if you had to guess, like why haven't they done this already?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's one huge reason, right? Is that they feel like they can make, even more money off of B2C advertisers than they can off B2B, right? And there's more, if they keep investing in the B2C side, they'll make more money than the B2B side. That's one potential reason. Another reason is more around the fact that, for Google, and think about it this way, right? Another reason is that LinkedIn has the firmographic data, right? They know the company profiles, the industries, et cetera, et cetera. Google and Facebook don't. So they would have to go and buy that data, right? That opens them up to more scrutiny, to more privacy objections. There's rumors that Google might be buying HubSpot, but then that kind of got, poo-pooed and like shut down. There's all these concerns. And in fact, Facebook had a data marketplace back before Cambridge Analytica, and then they got rid of it, which is interesting. So those are like kind of what I would say are the two main reasons. Is just the amount of money to make off of B2C, and then the additional scrutiny of adding in more data at a time when the world is already concerned about them having too much data to begin with. Maybe like a third reason that makes it less of a strong opportunity is also this attribution issue, right? With B2B, there's longer sales cycles, which makes attribution more difficult. Whereas with B2C, right, I can see an Instagram ad, click on it, buy some bag, and then, all in one session. That doesn't happen in B2B, which makes, the proving your ROI a little bit harder. Yeah.
So it sounds like
complicated.
B2B has a lot more challenges that B2C tends not to deal with. However, there are options, whether it's, enhancing the way you think about and deploy measurement, or the partners that you invest in to expand the effectiveness of your audience targeting. A lot we can learn from B2C, but B2B seems to be its own world that you have to learn to build for and operate in.
Totally.
Keith,
Yeah,
appreciate your thoughts today. Thank you for coming on. Love what you're doing with Primer. Can you tell our followers where they can listen and learn a little bit more about what's happening with with you and
Yeah.
Primer?
Sure. I'm actually about to kind of release like a whole report on the state of B2B attribution, full of little fun factoids that'll, make you really sad. Most people pretty sad. But you can find me on LinkedIn, Keith Delaney. Our company's website is sayprimer.com, SAY primer.com. And yeah, if you are, interested in sort of figuring out how to do B2B targeting on B2C platforms, that's really where we excel.
Amazing. Keith, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.